Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Security Chips podcast, the Data Security Council of India's very special forum where we attempt to explore the nuances of data protection and cybersecurity, as well as inspire those who are on their path to become the next generation of cybersecurity and data privacy leaders. So, in today's episode, I attempt to uncover the journey of Ms. Abha Tiwari, the newly appointed DPO of Vistara. So, prior to this, my very special guest Abha was also the DPO of Renault. So, do stick around if you want to learn more about her very interesting journey and her illustrious career. Without further ado, here's Security Chips.
Always felt that you would have like years of experience, but I'm pretty surprised you're 2023 pass out. I'm very impressed with her work.
Mature for my age, but immature in my looks, apparently. but
But
Abba,
that's the years of wisdom that you've gathered, na? So how is it? See, 2023, and then you also had COVID in between, and not sure if you've missed your classes, been there with your friends. How was it?
don't get me started with that because there's definitely been that gap because we started with normal life as it is in my first year, and then second year also a unique thing about my journey is that I happened to do my law school in Assam, as I mentioned. So around that time, we also had protests. So
Yes.
we also had to leave college a bit early. And at the same time, the next semester, right when we came back, there was COVID. So then we missed like those critical 2 years of like
Almost 2 years.
bonding, pure bonding. But online classes were pretty interesting. So, and I also got to do a lot of amazing remote internships, which dealt with privacy.
Okay.
So,
So, those days when I was in law school and I passed out in 2009. So, you talk about remote internship, like, what is that? I think the concept of remote settled in only after COVID. The fact that you can be anywhere and you can still do a lot of work. I think that came in.
definitely. And in fact, even right now, as I transitioned from a student to a working professional, I'm still working remotely.
Yeah.
I really like how that transition, but at the same time, as I mentioned, it's pretty overwhelming.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm
but
sure.
again, I felt like the reason behind why I chose this particular podcast and this particular person is that you've always been an inspiration, and I think I speak for everyone, and especially people who will be viewing this episode, is that I think a lot of people are inspired by you.
I mean, thank you so much, Deepika. But I guess we're all just doing the best we can. And I don't know, I'm humbled, I'm overwhelmed. We met at Bangalore. And that was one of those presentations where we came up working with that special interest group on right to privacy and workspace. So trust me on this, Deepika, there's a lot that we learn from people around us and connecting with
Definitely.
the privacy community, which is, I think, evolving now. So you sort of know everybody who's there in that space. And then everybody is adding a lot of value to the community. Right? So we all somewhere are growing together. This whole, so I think if I have to put it, very like clearly, 2007 or 2008, when I was in law school, one of my teachers said that so we always knew that, that strategic information has to be kept confidential. After like 3 years in law school, strategic information has to be kept confidential. There's something called confidentiality of a lot of information that has to be protected, and that is protected by all organizations, right? You have a sense to that. But when you talk about personal data, those days, also because there was internet, but not at the same level, not at the same pace as we have it today.
Definitely.
Those were the days when you had those phones where probably Facebook or Instagram wouldn't work. So the social media hadn't caught up as much. Those were the days when you had those email IDs on Hotmail or Yahoo, and you had those Orkut. So we would say, and I clearly remember that back in school, we would write diaries and we never wanted anybody to read it. But then we
Yeah.
had Orkut, and you'd write comment and we'll poke people, and then you would want, why did you not see what I had posted? So there was this shift in generation that was happening. But nonetheless, so one of my teachers said that there's something called like personal data has to be protected. And there's something called safe harbor principle in the United States. And that got me thinking, why, safe harbor relates to ocean and ship, and it's supposed to be why would you need safe harbor principle for protecting personal data? That really didn't make sense when my teacher said, this is something that we're going to present at our conference. But nonetheless, you get working, and I researched a bit, and I tried understanding what is the whole concept about it, why personal data. That opened up another chapter. And that's something that drew me to the fact that the word human right, as we had understood, or as I had understood in the most traditional manner until then, had a new definition, had a new meaning, and privacy was inherent part of it.
Right.
The irony was that we were still at a very nascent stage, and so there was not much of not much of literature that was around, that was available around the concept of personal data.
Definitely. And I think back when you were in law school, you wouldn't have even expected the government right now to come out with an act which specifically deals with protecting people's personal data, right?
Not at all. So it was. So I remember there was this. So while one of those days when we would research on internet, and we'll just try and figure out that, why, how is it that privacy becomes an inherent part of. So what is the element of privacy? Is this a property that you can own? It's
Right.
not a property, but it is part of you. It is extension of you. Maybe we did not have those wearable devices those days.
Right.
All that you had was a phone, but then the tracking mechanisms on those phones were not as relevant as they are today. So I think the first memory of why right to privacy must be there was from that article which I had read back then to participate in that conference, which said, so there were like two lawyers, and they decided, they wrote an article on right to be let alone, and this was Samuel Brandeis and his friend, and this was in Harvard Law Journal. It was one of the articles that was published back in 1890s. The concept was that with advent of camera, now there were celebrities, there have been celebrities, people in spotlight all the time, and then there are stages where the public, so industrial revolution is gone, there is a shift in the manner the world works, and the larger interest was, you have certain people who have the spotlight, but what is it that they eat? Who do they meet? Where do they go? How do they spend their time? And there was a lot of interest in people. So when cameras came up, so earlier people would go to studios and get themselves, like, their pictures will be painted by an artist, which meant that they'll have to like sit for hours together. But with camera, it was like one snap. So let's say I and you going for a coffee, and if there's somebody who has a camera, they'll say, all right, Abha and Deepika have had a coffee break today, and it was this time, and then this is published by the newspapers. This became a nuisance. And when this became a nuisance, there was a need to differentiate between life of people when they are in public spaces versus life of people when they are in private spaces. So
Right.
maybe I and you would not want to discuss our life when we are in private space, but if there is a collaboration that we have to do, then we do it on a public space, which is known to everybody. So with this nuisance coming in, and cameras being the reason behind that, the whole concept of right to be let alone gained importance. Years later, can the government, can those in power use methods? Let's say we use telephones, and it is fairly common. We use mobile phones, and we feel that we would. So there are reasons why we would want to protect the data that we share with people. And there is, I think we should dwell into the fact why we need to keep our personal data private. It belongs to us. I must have the ownership. I must have the control on who I share this with. I may not be comfortable in sharing this data with everybody, because that may cause potential harm to me, including reputational loss. So whoever I share this data with, I must be able to bridge a trust. I must be able to build a trust. So somebody who's going to process my data should be able to give me that assurance that this data is processed in a certain manner. with this data, so let's say, I have a strong affiliation to a certain organization or to a certain body or to a certain whatever in the ecosystem. There is a likelihood, as we were talking off screen, off backstage, there is a likelihood that this information can be manipulated and used, right? And when I say this, we saw another subject coming up where, so right to be let alone was back in 1990s an article, but it was not, it like by the time it went to a court in a matter, this right was not really recognized.
Right.
So in another case law, the government deployed a certain mechanism to wiretape a conversation. And this wiretapping was done without the knowledge of the person who was on the telephone. Let's also understand there was another party on the other side of the telephone who had no clue about it at all and who probably had nothing to do with the criminal justice system. But their conversation was recorded and produced as evidence. Another concept came up. How much of surveillance in a way, how much of authority in a way, and how much of power should anybody have to process your personal data without your knowledge?
Definitely. So, thanks for that, Abha. And I must admit, as someone with a legal background myself, I really resonated with the facts when you really spoke about the ethical considerations and the legal considerations, and I really resonated with the whole journey that you described. So, and I must admit that I really find the intersection between the ethical considerations and data protection particularly fascinating. So, that being said, in the same way, how has your legal background shaped your approach to privacy? And at the same time, how has it really influenced you in making that pivotal career choice into transitioning into the role of a DPO?
So, like I said, personal data always had my heart. This was perhaps the first choice back in 2008 too, 2007, 2008 too. While I'd seen a lot of, and I have like, and there is a lot more to learn, and there's so much more that's there in the legal space in any case. But knowing that right to privacy is inherent to human right, and it can be distinguished and differentiated from how human right has been understood in the traditional concept. Privacy always had my heart. Data always had my heart. So then, fast forward to 2014, 2015, we had all those. Snowden happened, WikiLeaks happened, then Cambridge Analytica happened, and notwithstanding GDPR came in. So this was a time when the sort of data, everybody was so, I think I woke up to a time, I woke up in the generation, or in, where personalization was of services was given a lot of importance. Customer feedback was given a lot of importance. The players in the market were constantly trying to battle for attention of the consumers. And consumers were king. They continue to be, consumers are the king. But at what cost?
Right.
So when we had GDPR shaping up, and it was, between 2015 to 2018, 2019, I sort of knew that this is exactly the space where I want to be. And then suddenly, I think 2021 Diwali, we had generative AI, Chat GPT coming up and generative AI coming up. We had some space around deep fake before that. And the momentum that it caught with generative AI, I think this shifted my whole choice of making this career decision of trying to blend in technology with law. And to answer your question on how legal backdrop helps, is because as lawyers, you're mindful, aware, and you try to see 360-degree, you take a 360-degree approach to all that you're trying to do. So when you're evaluating a technology, for example, and then you know what is existing, what could possibly go wrong. It powers your journey as a DPO. It empowers you to understand the nuanced concepts like I was saying, right to privacy goes back to human rights. It's an
Right.
essential element of human right.
And just to pick up on that term that you use, that privacy is an inherent right. So, keeping that in mind, and of course, you narrating your entire experience with the development and the jurisprudential development of privacy, that being in mind, you as a DPO of organizations, and be it Renault or now be it Singapore Airlines, Tata Singapore Airlines. So, do you believe there's also an inherent ethical responsibility for companies when they're handling user data?
Absolutely. And it's a very good question, Deepika. I would like take a moment to share this with you here. The role of a DPO existed, I think, if my memory serves me right, from it stems out of German legislations. Then GDPR caught up, and we had something that controllers will have to have a DPO, processors will have to have a DPO. Not necessarily a qualification per se that is prescribed, but then there is a lot of detailing in the recital and in the law itself as to how they must be experts in the domain, somebody who is able to balance out between the interest of a lot of stakeholders, somebody who has a lot of independence to deliver what they deliver, somebody who is able to monitor, so somebody who knows the law, somebody who knows the sector, somebody who knows the business, somebody who has an overview to be able to say how the data should be processed. Because like I keep emphasizing on it, it is a data subject somewhere at the center of it. It is particularly, so the ethical part is particularly important, and I share a couple of examples with you. One organization had a product, and this product was given to beta testers. So so beta testers sort of, the whole idea was that how do you make your product smarter?
Right.
Right? So there are cameras on the product, and when the product is navigating through a certain space, it is constantly taking pictures. It's taking those pictures, and then these pictures are being labeled. So let's say if I tell you how do you navigate in between the space that we are sitting, and there's a product that has to navigate, somebody has to label it. This is a chair, this is a table, and this is how you navigate. So those beta testers, where they sign an agreement that all right, I am, and they're not laymen, huh? They're people who have sufficient understanding of how this testing happens. And then one fine morning, somebody woke up to find that a lot of their intimate pictures were put up on the internet, were there all over the internet, and they had no clue about it. And these pictures landed in another jurisdiction altogether.
Oh no.
Right? Investigation happened, right? Figuring out what went wrong. I'll not get into what happened in that investigation. But the ethical part I would want to emphasize upon is that with every product or a service, like I said, there is a person involved, a human involved. It's the data of that human which is transversing. So let's say I have put everything as say a privacy officer, as a DPO, I've put like everything is compliant, everything has been put in place. There is still a residual risk.
Right.
And if this risk is not addressed, it is likely to cause unexplainable harm. Some part of this harm can never be undone. I share a couple of examples with you. In another jurisdiction, there was this AI-backed tool that was deployed. The purpose of this tool was to raise alarm on fraud matters or suspected fraud matters, so that wherever there is a case that a social benefit has been taken not rightfully, those cases could be flagged and an investigation could be carried out. Intentions are all perfect. This is the way how it should be. But then the data set that was used, or for whatever reason, the bias that crept in that system, marked a certain category of people who are likely to cause these frauds.
Okay.
Marked a certain income group, a certain gender. That led to, now based on that, decisions were made, and that caused a lot of discomfort to those who were pointed out, who were put in that watch group. And many of them probably did not even have the resources to fight back. Years later, it was discovered that the data set or the output of this AI backed tool had a bias, had
Okay.
discriminated. So, Deepika, you can never go back in time and remove the bias. We had another instance where a certain tool will pick up, let's say, there are like historically, and I am, and these are my absolute personal views, a certain gender is doctor or a certain gender is nurse. Historically, this has been the case. There's nothing wrong with it. It is just that this is how the data set probably is available.
Right.
Now, if a screening has to happen, and if a tool is asked, a likelihood that the tool will say that this gender will be this gender will be that, which is not true. Both of us know it is not true. So, when we deploy when we deploy tools, when we evolve products, or when we get into processes, compliance is a huge bit of it, but ethics is a larger bit of it. And this question becomes all the more relevant when we talk about generative AI. A couple of days ago, I was reading through a certain article, and they said that voice of artists, work of artists, so that's constantly, it is scraped, then a database gets created. So like, say you write in a particular manner, and I have infinite capabilities because I'm machine, I have infinite capabilities, I scrape and I understand how you write. I don't copy what you write, but I create a lot of content just like how you write. Maybe some artists who are part of certain associations will be able to fight back, but then there are a lot more who will not be able to fight back. Now think of it, if I manipulate the manner in which I write, while essentially it's all about how you've been, like your original work, bit of like I am a machine and bit of manipulation. I have the capability of destroying your reputation altogether without you doing anything.
Right.
So, how much of recognition do you accord to these sort of technologies, because they can cause irreparable harms? Not necessarily that you can go and find a remedy under the law, but the question of ethics surely remains.
Definitely, Abha. And I really like the fact that the way you look at it is that you tend to humanize a data subject and you don't look at it
Should
as
be.
mere.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. There is a human at the center of it. So, as privacy advocates, as privacy lawyers, as privacy officers, we have to be always mindful of the fact that our act and omission is going to have an impact on a human right, on a human being,
Right.
right? And so, the question of, I think, consideration of ethics should be the first point before compliance kicks in.
For sure. But I think to go back to the point, and again, thank you again so much for those wonderful illustrations. But to go back to the point where you spoke about the multiple stakeholders that are at play here, right? So how do you really go about navigating that very, very complex maze as a data protection officer?
Deepika, we have this thing, and forgive me when I say this. Have you had that experience when you open your closet and say the clothes are literally falling all over you, and then you say, "I still have nothing. I still need to find something."
Yeah.
I find the same thing happening in a lot of organizations. We are sitting over tons of data, because historically we've never had a retention policy in not many laws. That's a fact. Nobody has ever told us to delete a lot of data, because data is data and it is there. And there is a huge cost to it. Huh? There's a huge cost to deletion. There's a huge cost to storage also. And there is an absolutely ridiculous amount that gets added if there is a data breach. But nonetheless, we're sitting on huge data. In absence of there being a retention timeline all the time, in absence of there being a retention schedule, in absence of there being a need for data deletion,
Definitely.
the amount of data that we have gathered is huge. Now, there is an inherent inertia. I don't want you to delete my data because I don't know, I might wake up like 20 years later, then I might need all of this, which is not true. But then there is a mindset which says that I might need this data at some point in time. So Forget the retention laws. For my own analytics purposes, I'm not ready to part with it. Larger interest. Second interest that comes in. You don't have the timelines. How do you define that I have to delete this data after these many years? Or this is where I defined, okay, endpoint. It was with GDPR, we said minimize the collection. And we said minimize the collection, not because you minimize the collection so that you have, it minimize the collection so that when there is a breach, all of that is not lost. The lesser data you have, the lesser data is lost. I mean, it is directly proportional. That principle data minimization came in, data retention came in. To answer your question again, the number of stakeholders that you navigate through is one is you, who will say, don't collect any data, be happy. But that is not how business works. You will have to have a lot of data. You will say, minimize data collection. Then somebody will say, no, I need a little more. You'll say, okay, then you'll retain it only for a certain period. They'll say, no, I have to retain it for a longer period. So there are a lot of conflicting interests, but somewhere I think, and then cybersecurity or infosec departments coming up and saying, what are the methodologies that I have to deploy so that this data is available in the, like this data is available, this data is accessible, but then this data is not prone to unauthorized access. You also have regulatory bodies in the ecosystem, not as much today, but I'm sure coming up. You also have those data subjects whose data is there with you. So probably they have a stronger power to negotiate because there's a lot of data subjects rights that have been granted to data subjects. And not to forget that you could be called upon to defend yourself in a court of law. And in order to establish that defense, in order to be able to defend yourself, you will need all of that data. So when you're navigating through this maze, you have to circumvent through all these stakeholders and maybe keep everything not the same page, not the same time, but maybe you'll have to keep everybody together while making a conscious decision of how you determine the data life cycle.
That sounds really interesting. But again, to go back on the point where you said that, there comes a part where you have to really balance multiple interests that are at play. So I really want to know your thoughts on when people say, data minimization is also it's a myth that data minimization is essentially not great for business. But at the same time, I've heard multiple people say that when you talk about data minimization, it's also, you're cutting down on the number of data that a business essentially processes. So that in fact is actually great for the business. So what do you feel about this?
I have had practical situations. So anybody who says that data minimization is not really the key, I need to collect whatever I want to. I would ask them that historically you have collected a lot of data. Please tell me all the places where you have used all the data. And any data set which was sitting in your system which was not used, technically means that the data was not required to be collected. If you think that data minimization is not the key, then I'll tell you, please provision all the penalties that we have in your budget. So when there is a loss, see, it's the time is we no longer talking about that there will be a breach and somebody else will suffer a breach. No, you will suffer a breach. It's just about when will you suffer a breach. You'll wake up to it tomorrow morning, 10 days later, but that is happening. So please understand what is the risk surface area that you're willing to expose. One. Number two, how well are you going to proportionally justify the data that you collect versus the objectives that you have to meet? And number three, for that objective, you may have other data sets too. So I participate in a lot of discussions, and a lot of time I get asked this question. We all have that fancy idea, right? That it should be fingerprint, scan your fingerprint and life is easy. Scan your iris and life is easy. Absolutely. Well said. Scan it, life is easy. But you can replace a password. You cannot replace a thumb scan. You cannot replace an iris scan. So when you are like, if there is this is why we say, in order to meet the same objective, try and understand which is the least intrusive method. Because when you lose the least intrusive method of meeting the same objective or with that data set, it is far easier to recover. Otherwise, the damage that could end up, if you think this is expensive, then try damage and you will know the results.
That being said, Abha, throughout this podcast, you've highlighted very interesting facets that you've come about as a DPO. But that being said, could you highlight the most challenging moment from your experience as a DPO? And I'm more interested to know what was that particular challenge and how you went about overcoming it.
Navigating that,
Yeah.
yeah. So Deepika, I'm not going to tell you what my KRAs are, because a lot of the audience that is watching us, that is likely to watch us, will know what KRAs are. I'll tell you of the practical difficulties, because we started somewhere in 2018, 2019, and we're still evolving. The privacy mindset is fairly new. And so one of those first trainings that I had, so every time I had to curate a training, I would try and understand my audience. I would try and understand what will probably connect with them. And as lawyers, we deal with a lot of dry subjects. This is not a dry subject. But how do you make somebody understand that this is not a dry subject? Because it is still, unless you have that mindset, this is still a dry subject. So, in the first trainings that I had, and it was all about privacy and right to privacy and why should it be protected. After the whole session was over, I still had a lot of blank faces. And I knew this job was not well done because the message was not conveyed. The challenge was, how do you shift the mindset? So, in the conversation, when somebody comes up, in the session, when somebody comes up and saying, look, it's my data. I'm happy to keep it in public domain because I want manufacturers or sellers or service providers to chase me. I am the king. My hardest part was to help them understand that when you do this, probably you are not, you think that you are in power, you think you are the king, but you have no clue that there is that vulnerable part of you is there in the public domain, and there is somebody who's selling you what they had to sell you. It was not the choice that you had made. From there on, to a place where I asked my audience and I explained to them that just because you spoke about buying a laptop, told you, or I'm sorry, I mean, not naming an organization, but if your phone gave you that, please buy this laptop, prices have dropped, it is not a coincidence. You didn't get lucky. You were heard. It was processed. How many times do you know what kind of access have you given to your phone? We love wearable devices. We all have a lot of smart ecosystem in our homes. your there are conversations that you would not have in public. You have it at home. You feel secure because then you're confined to the four walls of your room. But are you really safe? When something comes up that like our Facebook page and coffee's on us, is the coffee really on them? What have you traded? So when in one of the discussions, one of the training sessions, I was able to put it up with examples, I was able to share it with them, and right after that got over. So having this mindset shift where people understand that if I am consumer is the king, but I got to be mindful of what I share with who. And then after that conversation, there are like people who come up to you and tell you, hey, I never knew I had given this access, I've given this access, I'd given this access. Hey, this is why I was getting this is why this happened, this was happening. And next time when they go to a store and make the decision of buying a gadget, I'm not saying buying a gadget is wrong, but when they make the decision of buying a gadget, are you allowing it to do whatever it wants to do? When you're downloading an application, are you mindful of what you're downloading? When you're installing a system, are you mindful of what you're installing? When you're publishing a photograph or publishing something about yourself, are you mindful of what you're publishing? So my biggest challenge was to cause this mindset shift. And perhaps my biggest achievement is every time I'm able to make this difference. Because then I believe that there is a message that gets conveyed. And that's exactly the message that I'd wanted to give.
Convenience does come at a cost, and it's great, and it's honestly very admirable that you, as in your capacity as the DPO, also try to influence building a privacy conscious environment within your organization. So that's a great takeaway, Abha. Coming back to the point where we talk about individuals who aspire to be you someday, Abha. So I want to really touch upon the learnings that you've had on the way. So when you talk about coming to that level of leadership that you are in, so I want to really understand what sort of knowledge base that you cultivated in your journey. And I also want to get an insight into how how much certifications helped you on the way?
So um, certifications are a great way to learn. So behind every certification, there is a thought process. I don't endorse any particular certification at this point, but certifications are surely a great way to learn. However, like I said, there is an informational ecosystem. So just because I have done something that suits me may not suit you. So we as lawyers have a certain mindset and we choose a certain certificate. Somebody from an infosec background may not choose the same thing because we have our own strengths. And I think we must learning always continues, but it is always, it is always great to leverage on your strengths. Certificates will help you learn, but are they enough? I'm again asked this question a lot of time, and thank you for bringing this out by a lot of those who are right out of law school and who are looking, or those who are at mid senior level and are looking at getting into privacy domain or cybersecurity domain. Which certificate do I do that will help me get a job, or that will help me do my job, or that will help me find a certain stature? The answer is certification will only give you some information which would be academic in nature. Your learning is going to come from your environment. Your learning is going to come from all the developments that happens in your ecosystem, which means that you constantly have to look out. You do a certification, your laws would change. So you have to read, as lawyers, you'll understand, you have to read the new law. You've learned how to deal with it. Two, another important part is that you try and venture into spaces that are not yours or that you're not very confident with. So, when Tesla defined cars, it was no longer mechanical. It's a software driven car, right? 10 years ago, we always classified car as an automotive product, a mechanical product. Today, it's no longer like a mechanical product. It's a software driven vehicle. We did not have the same ease of ecosystem that we have in our home. Hey, what is the weather outside? One of the gadgets that we have. What is the weather? What is the temperature? How long will it take me to? We did that voice thing was not there. It is there today. Our ecosystem is evolving, and we have to be aware. We have to be well read. We have to be well researched, not just around us, but the manner in which it is shaping up across the globe. So I think that will help. And the more challenges you take, the more opportunities you will find. You have to just convert your challenges into opportunities.
And coming back to that point where you really talked about how an automobile is not just an automobile anymore, um, how do you, as a data protection officer, again, when it comes to a considerable overlap of laws, so how do you really navigate that space of now being a DPO of, let's say, the automobile industry to now being the DPO of someone
Into
from the
aviation.
aviation industry? So how do you really go about the sectoral regulations
I
along
think
with data
I
protection?
think now it's there in every, like, tomorrow if you ask me a question coming from pharma, or if you ask me a question coming from retail, the key is that you have to rationalize, and when we rationalize, it is the strictest that you choose. More than that, beyond that, there is a risk appetite that organizations have. And then there is always a residual risk that is covered by, say, cybersecurity insurances or risk insurances, risk assurances that goes with it. What I've learned and I've also been venturing a bit into health, all from a perspective that I wanted to understand how the pharma or health sector works, how fintech sector works, how aviation works now, or how auto has been working. Or there is an inherent nature of technology creeping in, and so there must be an inherent nature of you trying to decode them at all possible times and terms, and understand what consequences it can possibly have on people. So do not hesitate to just go up and read the terms and conditions of, say, a certain product which is available online. You may not possibly buy that, but just read through the terms and conditions of a product, of some cloud service providers, of how a code of conduct is constructed. And you will see that a lot of it will start making a lot of sense, because then you will start seeing the holistic picture of the holistic, that 360 view of any activity that you do, irrespective of the sectoral or the national regulation. Not just this, keep an eye on the global regulations too. Keep an eye, not just the law. There are a lot of guidelines that are published. Keep an eye, watch out for those guidelines too. There are a lot of opinions that are published. There are a lot of thoughts that are given by in the academic world. Read through that too, and you will see that it is constantly evolving. One, and then there is a sort of connect between all of them.
Right. So, this has truly been a very insightful discussion, Abha, and thank you so much for sharing that a slice of your life, if I may. And as parting words, Abha, as many of our listeners, as you pointed out, might be in their early careers or are just in that phase of getting that certification or about to become a DPO, and essentially those who aspire to follow your footsteps. So, what would be your message for someone who someday would want to be a data protection officer?
All of you are unique. All of us are unique. We have our own journeys. I would say, learn, gain, and don't let that opportunity come. It might sound a bit hard, because you're, so as lawyers, probably you're venturing in IT space, you're venturing in health space. There are a lot of things that may not make sense to you immediately, but learn as much as you can. None of this is going to go waste. And one day you will appreciate all that you learn. And this is absolutely not difficult, absolutely not hard. And I obviously, if there is support, and then you always have the ecosystem which is there, you can always come back, you can always connect, and just dive in.
Thanks, Abha. And there you have it. As Abha Tiwari puts it, there are miles to go before you sleep. So, thank you again for tuning in. And thank you,
Thank you
Abha, for
so much,
being a
Deepika.
very special guest for today. You continue to be an inspiration, as I put it across in the beginning of this episode. So, thank you again. And that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you again for tuning in to Security Ships. See you in the next episode.